Before we proceed with the session, I would like to give a brief introduction about a keynote speaker, Professor Arthur S. Berger. Sir Arthur S. Berger was born in Boston in the year 1933. Sir is Professor Emeritus in Broadcast and Electronic Communication Arts at San Francisco State University. When he was in school at Roxbury Memorial High School for Boys in Boston, he didn't have the slightest idea of what he wanted to do in the future. One thing that he was aware of was that he had a keen interest in writing and drawing. He was still having a blurred image about his career plans, so he took a number of tests, one of which was called the Tudor Preference Test, and they all came out with the same result: advertising, mainly because of the creative mindset that he possessed. But Sir always had negative feelings about the advertising industry because of the power that it had in shaping individual behavior. Hence, he opted out of advertising and got a BA in literature and philosophy at the University of Massachusetts in 1954. Sir Arthur received an MA degree in journalism and creative writing from the University of Iowa in 1956. Sir was drafted shortly after graduating from Iowa and served in the US Army in the military district of Washington in Washington, D.C., where he was a feature writer and speech writer in the district's Public Information Office. He also wrote about high school sports for the Washington Post on weekend evenings while in the army. Sir spent a year in Milan after he got out of the army, and then he came back and wrote a dissertation on the comic strip Lil Abner in the American Studies program at the University of Minnesota and got a job at San Francisco State University. After a span of 12 years, he ended up in the social science program in the Broadcast and Electronic Communication Arts department, where he taught courses on media criticism and writing. He portrays himself as an assassin of academics because Sir has written a number of dark comic academic mysteries like Mascom Murders, the Hamlet case, in which he has managed to kill a dozen or so professors, an occasional dean, and college president using various means like knives, poison guns, poison arrows, bombs, etc. In his mystery novels, he has also expressed a certain kind of sadness which he feels because of the current state of universities as they have become more and more profit driven. Sir Arthur has been a close observer of the media industry and has seen the media culture evolve over the years. His critical thinking can be clearly seen through his write ups, which comprise of more than 100 articles, numerous book reviews, and more than 70 books on mass media, popular culture, humor, tourism, and everyday life. We are honored to have you with us on a discussion panel, sir. We welcome you, sir.
My pleasure.
Okay,
Actually, now that
yes, sir. Yes,
uh,
sir. Carry on. Yes, sir.
and not when you mentioned my book, The Hamlet Case, I could have actually called this talk The Hamlet Case and Media Criticism, because in that a mystery, uh, I have a crazy professor from University of California at Berkeley murder the whole staff of his journal, his board of editors, but not until each of them has given a different interpretation of Hamlet. So you have a semiotic interpretation of Hamlet, a sociological interpretation of Hamlet, a Marxist interpretation of Hamlet, and so forth. So that is the same kind of thing that I had in mind when I call this the Rashomon case, Rashomon and media criticism. When I started teaching media criticism at San Francisco State University, I faced a problem, and that is how should I teach the course? At that time, uh, most of the people who taught courses in media criticism and media literacy, whatever you wish to call it, used a book of readings, and so that what they would discuss a chapter in the book with the students. In the middle of the semester, they'd give them an exam, and they would say, what did Marshall McLuhan say about media and understanding media, or what did Roland Barthes say about wrestling and mythologies, etc. So basically, the testing was on the memory of the students. And I think relying on the memory of students is not a good idea, because it goes in one ear, they remember it for the exam, and then they forget it. So I decided on a different methodology that has informed my teaching. And that is teach students methods of analysis and ask them to use a method of analysis to analyze a text. So for example, so I wrote this book, Media Analysis Techniques, and the first four chapters, the first is on semiotics, the second is on psychoanalytic criticism, the third is on Marxist criticism, and the fourth is on sociological analysis. I sometimes joke that Monday I'm a psychoanalytic critic, Tuesday I'm a Marxist critic, Wednesday a sociological critic, and so forth. But the point is, I believe that when you teach students a methodology, they remember the methodology and they start seeing the world differently. So, for example, we had 3-hour classes. So I always started the course off with Rashomon. And the reason I started with Rashomon is because it's a fantastic film. It's certainly one of the greatest films I've ever seen. I saw it in around 1952 or 53, and it's been with me ever since. What happens in Rashomon is something happens in a grove involving a samurai, his wife, and a bandit, and they're observed by a woodcutter. But what makes the story so wonderful is each person involved in that story tells a completely different description of what happened. You know, so that was sort of the model for me. So I was thinking, I'll teach the students 4 different methodologies. One is the woodcutter, one is the samurai, one's the bandit, so forth. And then at the end, for my final examination, I'll show them an episode. I used to use The Prisoner. I don't know if you're familiar with that television series, but I used to use The Prisoner. At the end of the semester, I'll show them an episode of The Prisoner and ask them to write 4 different interpretations of that film. So I believe I sent you the 7 humor theorists. Did I send that message, that text, that little article I wrote on 7 humor theorists in search of a joke? Did I send that to you? I guess not. Can you hear me?
So I
Yeah.
think you have. I think you have because I think I
Yes, sir.
have that 7 humor theory. Yes, I think we have that.
Well, the reason I sent that, not because I was particularly interested in having you analyze the joke, but what I wanted to do was show you can take a text, in this particular case, a joke, and you can see how different people analyze it, see different things in the text. So that basically is the model that I used, and I've used that model, for many years in the books that I write. In the second, so the first part of media analysis techniques, I explain the methodology. In the second part of the book, I have some chapters in which I apply the methodologies to different subjects. I chose subjects that I thought wouldn't sort of disappear. If you take a television program, it might be popular when I start writing the book, and when I'm finished with the book, it's no longer available. So I took things like football games. I took a film, Murder on the Orient Express. I took news, things like that. And then I showed how a Marxist would talk about the football game, about football, how a psychoanalytic critic would talk about football, so forth. So teaching. And when I wrote that book, it was kind of an interesting story. I sent it to this publisher, Sage Publications. I believe they're in England. So you have Sage books. It was rejected. So then I told a friend of mine who was a professor at the University of California at Berkeley, was a very distinguished political scientist, about my problem. He says, give me the book, I'll send it off to someone. Who did he send it to? Sage Publications. And they accepted it. And at the time when it was published, it was kind of revolutionary because there wasn't anything quite like it. So it did very well, and it's now in the 6th edition. I've been rewriting that book for for 25, 30 years. It's kind of crazy. But I think I've got to the point now in my career where I don't want to rewrite any more of my books. I mean, I've rewritten so many of my books that I spent half my time rewriting myself. It's a little boring. So then the question is, how do you teach the methodology? So for that, I tried different things. I developed a series of games that we would play in which students would be asked to sort of apply concepts from semiotics to something, or do a psychoanalytic analysis, or write a little psychoanalytically informed story. So I developed over the years a number of games, and I actually put them together in a little book called Meteor and Communication Games, or something like that, something of that nature. And that's important because you can lecture to the students about the theory and so forth, but unless they can sort of see how it can be applied and and try applying it, it's hard to move from the theory to actually being able to write a semiotic analysis of the prisoner. So so I developed a series of games. I mean, I've sort of knocked myself trying to figure out how to get students to understand this stuff, you know. Then I developed these games, and we would play a semiotic game every semester, a Marxist game, a psychoanalytic game. So my students, when they did the psychoanalytic criticism, were putting me on. They thought it was all nonsense, but they learned how to apply the psychoanalytic theories anyway.
Uh, Sir, I
So
have a question. I have a
yes,
question.
yes,
May I ask a question, please?
yes, of course.
Yes, sir. Actually, sir, we are living in this globalized era where we can say that which is driven by the market, and
Yes,
market basically promote the consumerism. So, like, going against this flow, I mean, how tough it was going against the flow? Because,
yes,
yes.
yes. Well, you see, um, I'm very much interested in advertising. So I have a book. I wrote a book on advertising for those people who want to go against the flow. You know, I have two things to say. So in that book, I have two chapters. One on how to analyze print advertising, and one how to analyze television advertising.
Mhm.
And that is to enable people to sort of understand how advertising is working on them and affecting them. It's kind of interesting. I've spent a lot of time. I never would have imagined when I started writing. You know, you have to understand. I wrote my PhD dissertation on a comic strip, so it was considered very radical at the time. I don't think there had been. I don't think there had been a PhD dissertation on a comic strip. But I'm very much interested in humor and art, and I actually had met Al Capp, who wrote that strip. So so I started with a comic strip, and I ended up with consumer culture and discourse analysis. But I understand your point, and the one of the theses that I would have is that by learning these techniques, the students are able to process all the advertising and all the other aspects of consumer culture that is being thrown at them. And it's really interesting. And a number of years ago, I was in a supermarket, and this woman came up to me, and she said, "Oh, Dr. Berger, good to see you. How are you?" And so forth. I hadn't seen her for 20 years, 25 years, something like that. She said, "Do you remember me?" I said, "Of course I remember you." She said, "Well," she said, "you know that semiotics that you taught us? It's still with me." Now that meant a lot to me, because what it means is, my theory is that when you teach students a methodology, they start seeing the world differently. You see, they start processing the world differently. That is, all of a sudden they realize that there are all these signifiers, and what do these signifiers mean? And so most of us, I would argue, are actually amateur semioticians. You know, for example, when we have the political parties, people are interested in the color of ties, the people that they're wearing, and the color of suits, and all of these things which are really signifiers. And so the question is, what does it signify? Or somebody during a presidential debate, somebody looks at his watch. That signifies something to people. They're not so much interested in what's going on. They're waiting for it to get over with. So I think your point is that, yes, we are bombarded daily. I mean, thousands of television commercials, of print ads. Everywhere you turn, we're being attacked. So the question is, how do you counter that? And the way you counter that is by understanding how they're doing, what they're trying to do and how they're trying to do it. That's why a lot of advertising agencies employ semioticians. As a matter of fact, I know two Brits. One was educated at Oxford and the other, I don't know where he was educated. They're both semioticians who have companies that advertising agencies use. And of course, they use psychoanalytic theory and so forth. Now I have a book by somebody who's interested in what happens when you put someone in one of these machines and you show him a Coca-Cola and see how his mind, really his brain starts flashing. So that basically is the ultimate goal in my teaching. It's not so much just how to analyze text, but how to apply what you learn to your life. So I always used to tell my students, they used to laugh. I said, after this course, your life will be different. You see, of course, they thought it was nonsense. And when they use psychoanalytic theory to analyze an episode of The Prisoner, it was all a big put on. They was trying to show me how they could use these concepts to analyze what happened in the text. But in reality, even though they thought it was a put on, they were being affected by it. So all of a sudden they realized there may be something called the Oedipus complex, or there may be, all these psychoanalytic concepts that apply to them. So a number of years ago, relative to this, I had a grant, and I went to Argentina. There was a big conference on visual semiotics. So I wrote a paper for that, but they wanted me not only to give the paper, but to go to some universities and talk to professors there. And the professors all said the same thing. They said, I teach my students a year of semiotic theory, and at the end, they tell me they don't have the slightest idea what to do with it, you see. So I said, yes. The reason is because professors love theory, and they could spend the rest of their lives in this pit talking about theory, but they give no thought to how the students are going to be able to apply this theory.
Exactly.
So I would play semiotic games with them, you see.
Wow.
To give them a sense of how it should be done. And when I played these games, the way I did it is I divided my class into groups of three. One person, I did it in the groups of three because I think that's the optimal number for people to cooperate when they're studying. So I did it in groups of three, and I said one person is the scribe. You write what everyone talks about, but everyone everyone should contribute to the analysis. And so they'd play a game, the three of them, one of these games, a psychoanalytic theory game. In the psychoanalytic theory game, I gave them a group of different concepts, sibling rivalry, Oedipus complex, things like that, and told them to write a story, And these games we played for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. And then we spent another 20 minutes talking about what the different groups had come up with when they were playing the games. So the problem was that these professors in Argentina, and everyone told me exactly the same story. I talk about semiotics for years, and I don't know what to do with. So I played games with them, and to give them an idea that lecturing about theory is not enough. Theory itself is so abstract. I mean, that when the students, after a year of it, they've got so many concepts and so forth in the head, but they don't have the slightest idea how to do anything with them. So what's important is less theory and more games and applications. So
Wow.
that's basically my method of teaching, and that's basically when I write my books. You know, I was just looking at a couple of books. I have two books out that are being considered for publication. One is on luxury, and one is on everyday life. There's a famous book called Everyday Life in the Modern World by a French writer. So I called my book Everyday Life in the Postmodern World because I wanted to say something about postmodernism in the book. But when I was looking through it, uh, so I could write a prospectus, I noticed, yeah, Marxist analysis. I mean, it's basically I'm a one trick pony. Marxist analysis, psychoanalytic theory, feminist theory. So I'm spending my life actually taking theories and concepts and theories and applying them to whatever I'm interested in. So that is basically the name of the game. So the theory of how I teach is relatively straightforward. It's how you do it that's important. You have to figure out ways to get the students involved. And what I noticed when students were playing these games, they got really involved on this. Instead of just sort of sitting there and with that bored look on their faces that you often find with students, they actually got really involved in these things and applying the concepts and trying to figure out, how to play the game. Like one of the games I gave them was I gave them a sheet on which I had concepts like anxiety, alienation, and I said, how would if you have to make a series of images that reflect alienation, you know. So don't actually make the image, but tell me what images you'll have to show alienation. So they would put things like somebody separated from a group of people, they're all in a room, and this person is by himself or herself and so forth. So basically they would play these games, and then we had a lot of fun talking about the different ways that they played the game and mistakes they made and very clever things that they did and so forth. So that's basically what it comes down to. That's how I worked.
Yes. Sir, there is a question from Dr. S.R. Sanjeev from Kerala. And
Yes.
he's saying that it seems semiotic reading of news, television, and related research have not been explored to its full potential yet. You have given a methodology in this direction. However, do you think there should be a paradigmatic shift in social construction of meaning if semiotic reading is applied to actual visual when edited mindfully?
Mhm. The social construction of meaning, right? Yes, 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 yes. Yes, well, I mean, it seems to me that all meaning is socially constructed. That is what happens is we're born into a family, in a culture, a subculture. From that family, we learn certain notions about how to behave, how to think, and so forth and so on. And that affects us in very profound ways. There's a British sociological linguist who made a study of how people use language in England. And what he discovered is there are two different styles of language. One is sort of the working class style, which is very simple words, very simple social construction of the sentences, uh, present minded and so forth. And the other from the middle class is altogether different, just the opposite. Basil Bernstein was his name. So you learn just from the way children learn to use language. It's sort of basically class-based to a large degree. So if you're born in the working class, your use of language is going to shape your notions of what the future should be like, what you can do, and so forth and so on. Whereas if you're born in the middle classes and upper classes, your notion of what society holds for you and what your possibilities are is quite different. So of course, culture has always been a major interest to me, and almost every one of my books has something like the term culture, or quite a few of them have the term culture in them, and they're all devoted to culture. I always say that in certain respects, I'm like a cultural anthropologist who happen to be interested in media and pop culture. But it's the culture that we're born into. And of course, now we realize now that much of our behavior, even our gender, is socially constructed. In the old days, the binary oppositions, were sort of dominant. Now we realize that gender is socially constructed. And so we have all kinds of variations now in gender in America that people seem to have recognized. Whereas before it was considered crazy, and now we recognize that there are a lot of people who aren't just male or just female. So so I would say that the social construction of reality is basically underneath a lot of what I do. I'm trying to explain how that works, and of course we have a lot of French theorists who've written about. I'm trying to think of the name of the Pierre Bourdieu. Bourdieu has written a lot on that. How he says taste is not personal, but is socially constructed, just like gender. So does that answer the question?
Yes, sir. Actually, I was just going through a video of yours. And you were talking about a secret agent. So I I request you to kindly throw light on that secret agent and the coding language you are talking about. So kindly explain about that secret agent you were
Yes.
talking.
All right. I have two identities. One is a secret agent, and the other is decoder man. What happened was many years ago, George Gerbner, who was the editor of the Journal of Communication, asked me to write an article about how I analyze popular culture. So this is many years ago, and I was in those days I was much more diligent about things than I am now. So I wrote this long article and had 3 parts. So the first, I forget the first 2 parts, but the third part was called The Secret Agent, in which I said, you can think of me as like a secret agent who is looking for secrets in the culture, not, secrets about atom bombs, but secrets about the culture that shapes the way people behave and see the world and so forth and so on. So he threw out the first 2 parts of the article and published the third part as The Secret Agent. So then I became known to my students as the secret agent. But it's actually, I mean, it in a sense, I think we're all like secret agents. We're looking for things in the culture that is so much part of our lives that we don't even notice them. See, I think Georg Simmel wrote an article about how when people are strangers in the culture, they see things in the culture that the people in that culture don't see, because it's just part of their everyday life. So the metaphor of me as a secret agent is that I'm like a stranger in my own country, and I'm looking for things of interest that are, part of the country, of the culture, that are very interesting, that people don't even notice because they're so used to it. Of course, things have been so crazy in America in the last 4 years, that I think a lot of people realize there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in this country, and there's a lot of crazy people in this country who don't believe in science and don't believe in global warming, I don't know what they believe in. They don't believe that Trump actually lost the election. I mean, it's pretty amazing. So there's no end of things to write about when you have your methodologies. You see, the point is, when you have the methodologies, all kinds of things open themselves up to you, because you can start sort of looking at whatever it is that interests you and seeing that there are different ways to analyze whatever it is you're interested in, and these different ways yield insights that are very valuable to sort of to get a better picture of what's going on. So, for example, in my article about jokes, and I've been interested in humor for a long time, and I've written like 6 books on humor,
Mhm.
and they all basically, one of them has the same structure: psychoanalytic theory of humor, semiotic theory of humor, Marxist theory of humor, and so forth. As many as I could what philosophers had to say about humor and so forth. When you have the methodology, then the world opens itself up to you. So that's basically, that's why I say, if you're teaching media literacy, media criticism, media analysis, whatever you want to call it, it makes more sense to sort of indoctrinate students with the methodology than teaching what other people have to say, or even what you had to say about a subject if you're not teaching methodology. So that has basically been the main concern for me when I write these books. I've written other books that aren't like that deal with other things, but usually underneath it all, there's this sort of fascination with the way different people see the world, and the different methodologies that people have to explain what's going on.
Mhm. There is a question from Shikha Mishra, and she is asking that there are areas where media research is closely associated with ethnographic study also. In that case, what would be the appropriate mixed method to conduct research?
Yeah. It's kind of interesting that you asked me about research, because for some strange reason, when I used to go lecture abroad, a lot of people asked me about research. I never taught a course in research, and but I wrote a book on it because I was at a meeting of the International Communication Association once, and at that time the editor for communication, was living in Boston, and the meeting was in Boston. So she took me out to lunch, and we were in the middle of lunch, and she opened up her briefcase and pulled out a book. It was a research book. She said, "We published this book on research, and it's not selling. Why don't you write a book on research?" It's like saying, maybe I should play football for the 49ers or something like that. So I said, okay, well, I'll give it a try, see what it's like. So on the plane home, I looked at her book, and one of the things that I noticed also was the style. My style of writing tends to be very informal, and that drives a lot of academics crazy. They like informal styles. So my research book was really strange because I have, in every section, I insisted that I have a section on humor. And so I looked at her book, and I looked at some other books that I had. I had taken a course in research in 1954 at the University of Iowa. So I looked at the different books and research that I had. I wrote to my colleagues at the university at San Francisco State and asked them to send me their course outlines. And from that, I got a notion of how to construct a book on research. And then I wrote it. The only problem I had is I didn't know statistics very well, but I had a friend of mine whose wife was very good in statistics, and she wrote the statistics chapter, this part of the chapter on statistics, and I filled it out with examples and so forth. So conducting research, so I'm really not, actually I'm doing research all the time on the books that I write, but how to construct research is a dilemma, because I can't really speak to research that is statistical, So all my research is based on finding what other researchers have had to say on the subject, and using their or not necessarily research, but writers, and using their concepts to support my ideas, or to explain what's going on. But I would say that I'm always conducting research, but not statistical research. I'm a I'm not a quant. I'm a qual. I conduct qualitative research, so I can't say anything about that kind of. Well, qualitative research, then you're back to different theories: semiotic, psychoanalytic theory. What the different, what did Freud have to say? What did the modern psychoanalysts have to say? What do the Marxists have to say, and so forth on the particular subject? So I'm basically a quant. In fact, the first edition of my book, Media Analysis Techniques, when it came out, it was a relatively small book. And I was a visiting professor at the University of Southern California after it come out, a year or so after that, in 83, 84. And I was standing in the hallway talking to somebody, and I heard the dean say, there's no quants, it's data free. Data free. So I immediately created a character called Data Free Man, that I wrote about in my book on research.
Yes,
Or
the whole world is running. Yes.
what?
So the whole world is running for the data right now. So the next war could be the data war, actually.
Well, yeah, and absolutely, it was data free. It actually was data free. So the question is, can you write a book that's data free? Yes, you can write a book that's data free. If all you talk about is theory, theories and the application of the theory. Since then, I've abandoned my data free position, and now I use data from other people in my books, as long as it's to support any contentions I have about something. So, but um, for basically the second part of the book on research was basically rewrites of other people's chapters and theories about interviewing and stuff like that. It doesn't interest me basically at all. What interests me is qualitative analysis, and because basically that's what I am. So, with a little bit of help from the quants, when they've done research that I found useful, that I apply. I don't know if that answers the question, but it's it's the best I could do about research. Yes.
Sir, I'll request you to kindly throw light on your work. Actually, that actually really fascinated me. Ads, fats, and consumer culture.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
Well, that, yeah. You see, I ought to say something about how I work as a writer. You see, um, most academics, when they want to write a book, they write a prospectus about what they plan to write in the book. They might write a chapter and send it off to a publisher. Then what happens is, and this is what I'm experiencing right now. They send it off to the publisher. The publisher sends it off to professors, and those professors spend 1 month, 2 months, 3 months getting around to looking at the book, and then they write back. So you've got 3-4 months you've lost, and then if they know, you send it to someone else, so they spend another 3 months. So it could be a year before you start writing the book with a contract. And you may never get a contract, so you'll never write the book.
mhm.
I opposite completely the different way. I write the book. So I write the book, and then I send it off to publishers. So with ads, fads, it was very unusual. Because I got an acceptance right away. But what happens is I write the book, and then I send a query. And if they're interested, I send them the book. They send it out to professors and so on. So, and while the professors are determining whether they're going to accept the book, I start writing another book. So basically, I've written a lot of my books while I'm waiting to get accepted or rejected by publishers. So as I talk to you now, I have 2 books at publishers, and I was just thinking yesterday, I'm really upset about it because they take forever to decide whether they want to publish it. Now, in the old days, I had two publishers who made decisions on their own right away. I had a publisher named Mitch Allen who had a book published. He published something called Left Coast Press. Now he's got a PhD in anthropology, and you'd send him an article, a book, he would decide right away. He'd either say, "This is terrible," and then so I send it to someone else and they'd publish it, or he'd take it right away. So I'm sort of used to quick action on my books. So now I've got these two books. One is on everyday life, and the other is on luxury, also part of consumer culture. So the way with media with the ads fads, they took it right away, and then it evolved over the years. This is like I think it's in the 5th or 6th edition. I don't know. And the heart of that book are the 2 chapters on analyzing commercials, in which I analyzed the 1984 commercial, and on analyzing print advertisement, in which I analyze this wonderful Fiji ad of this woman holding, you can only see part of her face. She's holding a bottle of perfume, and it's got just a few words in French. The rest of it is just full of information on how advertising agencies work and their influence on society, and things of that nature. But I don't think I have the energy to rewrite that book or any other book. I've now reached the point. I'm going to be 88 soon. I think I've reached the point where I can say, the hell with them all. I'm not going to do any more of my rewrites. If they want something from me, I'm going to write a new book. I figured out that I've rewritten like 20. I've written books 25 or 26 times. I got 6 editions of ads fads. I got 6 editions of media analysis techniques. I got 5 editions of the research book. It's kind of interesting, but after a while, it reaches a point I'm saying, why knock myself out to find new material? Because you have to get 15% of material for the book, just so the publisher can make a lot of money by raising the price, of the book. And so but that book, I think that book is one of my more interesting books, because it's a big subject, a lot of people interested in it, and I feel that after they read that book, they at least come away with learning something about the methodologies, because before each chapter, I don't know if you've seen the last edition of the book, the 6th edition, but before each chapter, maybe it's in the 4th and 5th, I have a list of things to think about when you're analyzing a commercial or analyzing a print advertisement. So that, I think, alerts people to the fact that in texts like these, everything is important. There's a Russian theorist, Yuri Lotman, who said everything in a text is important. So the question is, how do you alert people to what the everything is? Typefaces, color, spatiality, all of that kind of stuff. So it's trying to alert people to those things, and then show them in the analysis how they should keep all of these things in mind and do the best I could in terms of covering all the different aspects of these things that are there.
So
I don't
now,
know.
Harsh, I request you to move further. I mean, I
What?
request other panelists. I'm just requesting other panelists also to move further so that they can
No,
even
I don't.
ask questions.
I don't hear you very well.
I'm just requesting to other students who are the panelists. They are going to ask questions now.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yeah.
So, sir, we would like you to throw light on popular culture and also how the media industry is playing its part in promoting the pop culture.
Would you repeat that question, please? I can't hear that well.
So, we would actually like you to throw light on popular culture and also that how the media industry is playing its part in promoting it in a large scale.
I can't hear. I can't understand.
He is saying actually, I mean, can you throw light on what is popular culture? What is the
Oh,
popular culture and
oh,
how media is promoting that popular culture? So,
okay.
yes, what is the
Uh,
connection between popular culture and media?
yes. Okay, that's a very good question. Yeah. Um, I used to make a distinction. I used to make a distinction between popular culture and everyday life. You see, um, I made a distinction between elite culture, popular culture, and everyday life. Elite culture is Beethoven symphonies, Mozart piano concertos, novels by James Joyce and serious writers and things like that. Everything else is pop culture, as far as I'm concerned. Uh, it's basically mass mediated culture. It's another way to put it. But not of of generally of a high level, uh, at a level that most people can understand and appreciate it. You know, a lot of sociologists have been writing about that. There's one sociologist talks about taste cultures. He said there are like 5 taste cultures in America, and each taste culture has the culture suitable to its sort of intellectual abilities and so forth and so on. So pop culture is everything that's not elite culture. Although a lot of pop culture now is sort of moving into elite culture. Now we're beginning to have these graphic novels, you know. So the question is, are they pop culture or are they elite culture? But to tell you the truth, I never wasted my time arguing about what is pop culture and what is elite culture, because you could spend the rest of your life. I'm more interested in, if I see something that I think is pop culture, and analyzing it and trying to show what it reflects about American character, culture, society, whatever you want to call it. Then there's a question of everyday life. I used to make a distinction between popular culture and everyday life. Say popular culture is mass mediated. Everyday life is the things you do, perhaps as a result of pop culture. That is, you've seen an advertisement for such and such a thing, you go out and buy it. So the pop culture is the advertisement, and everyday life is buying it. But since so much of everyday life nowadays is involved with media, I mean, I've seen statistics that we spend 12 hours a day, basically, with cell phones, television, radio, and so forth and so on. So since everyday life is sort of pop culture, I've sort of collapsed pop culture into everyday life into pop culture. So basically, our everyday lives are sort of full of pop culture, because if you watch 4 hours of television, which is what the average is in America, 4 hours and 6 minutes, something like that, I don't know. That's pop culture, you know. It's mass mediated pop culture. I know some people make a distinction between pop culture and folk culture, you know. So that's fine if they want to spend their time arguing about it. I don't really care. I just I just take what I think is pop culture and analyze it. Or elite culture, you know, for example, when I analyze Hamlet, you know, if Hamlet is shown on television, if if the play Hamlet is videotaped and shown on television, is that pop culture? You see, it's elite culture shown on the mass media, but maybe it sort of even becomes pop culture. I don't really know. But in any case, with Hamlet, I had a lot of fun because I wanted to show how different theorists analyze the text, and that basically is, you know, one of the main things I'm involved with. The notion that, to go back to Rashomon, that there's just one explanation of things is seldom enough. You know, the bandit, when told his story, what happened, completely different from the story of the woodcutter. You see, and the samurai's story was completely different from the bandits and the woodcutters, and you know, so everyone had a completely different story. So the question is, who's right? You know, or maybe parts of them are all right. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to say, but that was one of the pivotal events in my life, watching that film. The other pivotal event in my life was in 1973. I was in London on sabbatical, investigating English pop culture. And a friend sent me Saussure's book, Course in General Linguistics. After that book, my life was altogether different. I went in there as a sort of sociologically, anthropologically oriented pop culturist. I left as a semiotician, semiotically oriented pop culturist. So sometimes just one book can have a tremendous effect on you. And some other books, Marshall McLuhan wrote a book called The Mechanical Bride. Most people, when they think of Marshall McLuhan, think about his other books about understanding media. But The Mechanical Bride was basically a semiotically informed analysis of advertising and pop culture. And I had the pleasure of meeting him once. As a matter of fact, I had a conversation with him. But you don't have a conversation with Marshall McLuhan the way a regular conversation is, because he's sort of 6 steps ahead of you. So he was at an advertising agency in San Francisco. A lot of academics didn't like him because he was associated with advertising agencies and things like that. So I called the advertising agency, said, I'm a professor of media studies at San Francisco State. Could I possibly meet Marshall McLuhan? He said, come on over. So we had like a half an hour conversation, and I'm not sure exactly what he had to say. It was all sort of pretty weird. But I do remember I said, we have this topless phenomenon here in San Francisco. I'm thinking of investigating that. He said, oh, definitely. It's a very important subject. He said, investigate topless. So then, as part of my research, I went to these topless nightclubs, and I talked to the managers, and I talked to the stars, the topless dancers, and got certain notions about what it's all about. So there is sometimes fun in investigating pop culture, aside from the fun you have in reading the comic strip or the comic book and that kind of thing. I became interested in Spider-Man and that many years ago, and I wrote to Stan Lee, and we had a correspondence. And when I was at University of Southern California, I had 200 students in this class, basically on pop culture and art. I invited him to give a talk to my students. You have to understand, at that time, he'd get $50,000 to give a talk. He did it for free. But what was incredible about it is, this is before Spider-Man was a movie. You see, he was spending a lot of time trying to get it made into a movie. He gave his talk to 200 students, and when it came for questions, not a single one had a question. It absolutely blew my mind. You have 200 students there, and they have perhaps one of the most important comic strip, writers in modern times. He gives his talk. Nobody had a question. So we went out to lunch, and then he went off to his way. But so that made me wonder what's going on in the mind of these students. I had the football team learning semiotics. I mean, I had these huge, gigantic men, 6'4", 260 pounds, that come up to me afterwards and talk to me. It was I felt like I was, a midget. They were gigantic men. I had one of their baseball players came up and talked to me. I mean, and you had to use, with the students, you had to use their language. Like the baseball player came up, he said, well, I'm not doing well in this course. I said, well, look, he said, and all the grading was done by my teacher. I had 4 teaching assistants who did all the grading and everything. It was a wonderful year, but I hated Los Angeles. They wanted me to stay another year, but I wouldn't do it. But in any case, I used baseball language. I said, look, I said, think of yourself, if we wouldn't put you into a game without you warming up, right? Well, these little exercises you're supposed to do and these papers, that's a kind of warming up. So if you're going to be a pitcher, you have to warm up before you go and pitch. Oh, he could understand that. So you have to use the language of these people understand and sort of reaching them. With the football players, I just told them what I thought, and let them, they're used to being people telling them what to do. for this play, do this, for that play, do that. So I just told them what I wanted from them, and that was that. So it was an interesting experience. But I've always wondered how you could have someone like Stanley give a talk to 200 students, and not a single one had a question. Makes you wonder about whether education is wasted on the young. I don't know.
Yeah. So, Harsh, your question, I think your question was on Rashomon effect, and yes, so
Yes, sir, I would like to ask you, like, how is a Rashomon effect and media analysis related, and why is it important to like discuss about Rashomon effect and media analysis nowadays?
Well, look, basically everyone's a media analyst. They're all seeing, they're constantly seeing texts. They're watching 4 hours of television, so that means they're being exposed to 1 hour of commercials, which are in which the smartest people in the world are trying to convince them to buy this or do that or something like that. They see stories in which things happen and so forth, and we know that we learn all the work on uses and gratifications suggest that when people watch these texts, they're trying to learn about how to cope with other people and how to cope with life and things like that. So if you're going to spend 4 hours watching television, 2 hours listening to radio, 2 hours on the internet or whatever it is, watching Facebook or TikTok. You have TikTok in India?
it's
You have,
banned. Yes, it's banned here in India now.
yeah. In any case, so basically, if you're going to spend so much of your life involved with media, it's important to understand how this media works, how it affects you, how it affects society, how it affects culture. So that is why I'm so interested in teaching people how to analyze media, because then they can counter, like the persuasive efforts found in television advertising. It's all persuasive to a certain degree. It's so I've always thought that's an important subject, and it should be taught to students in every in high school and in lowest grades. They should all be taught different levels of sophistication of media analysis, because so much of their life is involved with media. You know, Unfortunately, I don't think that enough of it is done. Although I think some of it is being done nowadays in the schools. People are beginning to teach younger people how to analyze media, how to fight against the commercials and so forth and so on. You know. But how you do it is how you do, and there are countless books on the subject. When you write a book for a publisher, you find that they always ask you, what other books are there on the subject, and how is your book different from their books? So so I say, well, my books all are written in a accessible style, and they have lots of my drawings in them that nobody else has. Somebody described them as stick figures. I thought that was ridiculous. So my drawing of Roland Barthes is not a stick figure, but I think it's a very important subject for us, for people, especially like if you think in America, the effect of media on people, of Trump and his use of media, his it's kind of shocking, the effect. I mean, we have 70 million people who believe all kinds of lies, that they got. And I read somewhere somebody was talking about his technique is very similar to the fascists, the Nazis, their use of repeating the same thing over and over again, of lying endlessly and so forth and so on. So these things are important for people to know so that we can counter them. And just the other day, my wife and I were watching a news program, and somebody asked two women about, do you believe Trump won the election? Of course he won, they said. There's no question about it. He won. And so he's saying, how can two women who look perfectly normal and so forth believe such nonsense? but they do. So that's a tremendous question. I mean, almost everyone I know, it keeps on asking me, how do you explain these 70 million or 80, whoever, 70 million people who voted for Trump and who believe that he won the election? You know, how do you explain something like that? You know, so there's a tremendous, you know, sophisticated indoctrination that went on. Although Trump himself, I think, is a moron. How do you explain that? It's a tremendous question we have right now. We don't understand how his followers have been sort of brainwashed. I mean, my theory is a cult. He's a cult leader, and all these people are in the cult. And but then, of course, people ask, well, how do you explain the performance of the senators? You know, the Republican senators in the Republican Party. Well, my answer is that they're also part of the cult, and they're all sort of been sort of semi-brainwashed by Trump, and they're all afraid of him because in the Republican Party, they're all afraid that if he sends a tweet saying he doesn't like them anymore, they'll be primaried. Somebody will contest them in the primaries and will be more Trump than them, and so they'll lose their position as senator or congressperson. So it's a very interesting question. You know, the media, you know, shape us to a tremendous degree, and so understanding how the media work is a kind of central problem for educators and for everyone.
Yeah, next question, please.
So,
There is
Thank
echo.
you.
There is a lot of echo from your side, Trisha, I guess. Yep.
yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry. Would you repeat the question?
Yeah, she is. She is asking again. Yep.
Sir, since we're talking about media analysis, and advertisement plays an important, or advertisement is an important part of media industry. So, do you think is it ethically right to make use of emotion aspects so as to persuade a customer to buy a certain product or a service?
Is it emotionally? It's emotionally correct.
Sir, ethically correct.
Ethically correct.
Ethically correct. Sir, she's asking that is it ethically correct to use the emotional aspect in advertising in order to persuade a customer to buy a product or a service?
Well, look, the people who work in advertising agencies, they have convinced themselves they're doing wonderful work by growing companies. That's what I've spent 6 weeks in advertising agencies, 3 weeks in London at an advertising agency, and 3 weeks in San Francisco. There's something called the Advertising Education Foundation in America. And I applied to spend 3 weeks in an advertising agency, and an agency in San Francisco took me in for 3 weeks as a visiting professor. They gave me an office. They gave me a sweatshirt. They gave me a cap, all the stuff that the advertising people had. And these people work 60 hours a day, a week, trying to convince people to buy things most of the time that they don't need, or their product rather than some other product that they might need, and so forth and so on. Ethics, I don't think comes into the question at all, because look, we had for many years, advertising agencies were advertising cigarettes, So how can anyone be ethically, correct to spend a tremendous amount of effort convincing people to buy something that's going to kill them, give them cancer? So it's very difficult to find ethics playing a major role in the advertising industry. But there are some agencies, I think, where people do have a kind of sense of ethic. But in general, people who work for advertising agencies see themselves as being agents for that particular company and trying to convince people to buy it, and instead of competing because they would. One thing that people who advertised said, well, if we advertise Lucky Strikes and the other if we don't if they don't need Lucky Strikes, they'll get camels that another advertising agency is using. So I'm not doing anything terrible. But of course, they knew they were doing something terrible. In fact, there's a famous scene in which the presidents of all these tobacco companies were testifying before Congress, and they asked them, "Does this no? It has no negative effect on people. No negative effect." Well, they all knew it had a negative effect. They're all lying, for their teeth, you see, because they made such tremendous profits from this addiction that people had. So, talking about ethics in advertising, I mean, even ethics in other genres aside from advertising, from commercials and advertising. In some of the other genres we have, there's a question of ethics, portraying maniacal murderers, people slashing women, there's a lot of, it's a big problem when you're dealing with the arts of ethics. The ethical, we had, there were famous pianists who are Nazis, so what do you do with a person who's a fantastic artist, but he's a Nazi, Where does ethics come into it? It's a real big problem. And then my wife was a philosophy professor, and she taught ethics. She taught courses in ethics, and she dealt with the media in her ethics courses. But it's a very difficult bone of contention, because what's ethical for you is not, what you think is ethical, somebody else may not think is ethical. It's ethical. Is it ethical to grow a company? That's what the advertising people say. We grow companies. Well, we sell them liquor that is not good for them. We sell them products they don't need, and so forth and so on. So that is a real dilemma, how to deal with ethics. Of course, if you teach people media analysis techniques correctly, and they're aware of the effect that these texts have on people's psyches, on society, on the culture, and so forth, well, then that has a kind of ethical component to it, because people then recognize if something has the possibility of leading to antisocial behavior, then you can understand that it's not ethically, it's not really sound, not something that should be done. But I think for most people in the media, they don't think too much about ethics, unfortunately. It's a very good question.
So there is a very interesting question from Preeti J, and she is asking, sir, that please talk about Rashomon and its impact on you when you first watched that film.
No, I didn't understand what you said. Please talk about.
She is saying that please talk about Rashomon and its impact on you when you first watched that film.
Oh, Rashomon. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, I said before, when I saw Rashomon, you see, it's really interesting. I was watching a program. we have this program. I'm living vicariously now. I don't go out of the house basically, except to walk around the neighborhood because of the virus. So everything is vicarious. So I watched. There's a program in which people go to restaurants and eat, and one person who was in this restaurant said, "I had this dessert. It was life-changing." Life-changing dessert. Mm-hmm. Well, I said that Rashomon was life-changing, because at the time I was probably 19. I went to the university at 17. I graduated when I was 21. So I was 20, say 19 or 20, something like that. Certainly no older than 21, because I graduated in 54. So I must have seen it in either 52, 53, 54, whatever it is. But I can remember when I saw that film, when I walked out of that movie house, I had a different sense of reality. I think that's what great art does, is it changes your perspective on the world, on yourself, on the world. So all of a sudden, I realized that nothing was as simple as you thought it was. You know, that that things are much more complicated. That you can't assume that the way you see reality is the only way to see it, and it's probably affected by your culture, your background, and so forth and so on. Which is why travel is so valuable, because travel takes you to a different culture where it's like the Rashomon effect. All of a sudden, you realize there's different ways to drink coffee. You know, like in America, we used to have this coffee. It was sort of like weak coffee. Then all of a sudden, you go to Italy. I spent a year in Italy, and you start drinking their espresso and their cappuccinos and all this stuff. All of a sudden, you realize, well, coffee doesn't have to be terrible like this, the way it is in America. You can have very good coffee. And same with like with Rashomon, all of a sudden I realized, first of all, it's a brilliant work of art. I mean, and so when you're exposed to a brilliant work of art, it affects you in profound ways. You know, sometimes you read a novel, and after reading that novel, you see the world differently. You know, you've had a very profound experience. You know, that's what great novels are all about. These great novels, they understand life, and they show you aspects of life that affect you in profound ways. You go to a concert. You know, I can remember going to a concert when I was a student at the University of Minnesota, and the violinist played the Brahms violin concerto. It was so powerful. The people wouldn't let him off the stage. He had to do two movements from it for about 15 minutes after. They just would not stop clapping, you know, because it was such a powerful experience, you know. So that's what great art can do. But of course, pop culture sometimes can do that too. You can have, you know, profound experiences. But so Rashomon was I said, a central experience in my life, because after Rashomon, I mean, that was the basis of my writing media analysis techniques. Media analysis techniques is Rashomon. It's just that the samurai is a semiotician, the bandit is a Marxist, the woodcutter is a sociologist. You know, so that is basically what you could say that since 1954, 53, 54. I've seen the world differently, and it has affected just about everything I've written. In many, you know, almost everything I've written has been affected by seeing that, and by having read, Saussure and other people after him, Roland Barthes, and a lot of my work. It's kind of interesting. A lot of my work is informed by theorists, important sociological, cultural theorists, psychoanalytic theorists, and so forth. I have a book called Pop Culture that just came out, and on the cover, I have 8 theorists, you know, Roland Barthes, Sigmund Freud, Karl Marx, so forth. So it's these theorists who have shaped my behavior, and they're all sort of functioning as one kind of different stand-ins for my bandits and my samurai and his wife and the woodcutter, one sort or another. So I had a very profound experience watching that. And it's kind of interesting because now, you know, we're talking about 60 years later. 60 years later, let's say 60 years later, I'm still affected by it, you know. And I think that's what happens when you have experience of really great novels and really great films and really great plays. You see these works, and you're not the same afterwards. You go in one way and you go out slightly different. You know, and that is why we seek them out, I think. Now, the tragedy is that so many people don't. They just stay at the level of pop culture, where sometimes the emotions are rather profound. It's really interesting. Like, I'm interested in sports. When I was in the Army, weekends, I was a sports writer for the Washington Post. And I wrote on high school football, but I've been interested in sports ever since. And I've written a book on sports semiotics that I self-publish. I self-publish a lot of books because they're not long enough for regular publishers, or I don't want to wait for 3 months for them to decide. So I write all my books on 6x9 format, which I use to publish books on Amazon.com. So there's a lot of profound emotion in sports. Like I was watching the World Series, and the World Series, when you watch it in the field, when you're at the baseball park, it's one experience. And there you have the experience of being with a group of people with strong feelings about one team or the other. Like I grew up in Boston, and the Red Sox was our team, and so the problem with the Red Sox is they had a curse. They sold Babe Ruth to the Yankees, and they had a curse on them. They would never win the World Series, until finally they did win the World Series after about 60 years or something like that. So I was watching the World Series last year, and I was noticing the effect of television, the way the cutting that took place. And what you had in the World Series is a very powerful psychodrama in which the editor of that television program, and remember this, some of these games last for 3.5 hours, 4 hours, it could be endless, by cutting back and forth between a close-up of the batter, a close-up of the manager, a close-up of the pitcher, it turned into a psychodrama, a very powerful psychodrama. And one of those games involved this team being behind and coming back, and being behind and coming back, being behind and coming back. And this happened many times until the team that was behind finally won. At the end of that, there was this fantastic catharsis that people who are watching that program felt, because it wasn't only a sport, it was a psychodrama involving actors, who had, this actor could throw a ball, that would curve or would drop or speed at 100 miles an hour, or the other actor was swinging a piece of wood, a piece of wood to hit that thing, and the manager has a perfect look in his face, and sometimes they'd go out and talk to the pitcher. So there's sports, you have to realize, is not just sports. It's a study in psychology, and it profoundly affects people. You can see this especially in some football games, in which the game is lost in the last 3 seconds of the game. A team is ahead by 2 points. Somehow or another, the team that's behind gets the ball, moves the ball close enough so that this fantastic guy can kick a 50 yard field goal. And so in the last 2 seconds, the team loses. Well, you could hear in the audience a gasp, an absolute gasp as the team that was winning loses in the last 3 seconds, and an uproar of fantastic emotion of people as a team that was behind all of a sudden loses in the last 3 seconds. So people take all kinds of messages away from this. You may be losing, but maybe you'll win. Things may be tough, but maybe somehow you'll win. And so you have to look on sports as not just a kind of silly game, but as a kind of emotional experience that people have that sometimes can be very profound. I mean, if the team is ahead 62-6, nothing is, it's just boring. Then the announcers have to talk about something. They have to figure out what to talk about. But if it's very close, it's it's almost like watching a drama. And you know, sports is dramatic. That's what you have to. Sports are dramas. Sports games are dramas. Yeah. All right. So much of that. Okay. I'll take one more question. Okay.
Uh,
So,
yeah, continue, Visha.
so if we talk about trends in advertising,
Talk about what?
Trends.
if
Oh,
we talk
trends.
about trends in advertising,
Trends in advertising. Yeah.
ads of beauty and health products are always made in a manner which constantly point out the flaws of people. So, sir, do you think that media has created an image of perfection in the minds of people, which is turning out to produce a negative impact?
You talk too fast for me. You
Slowly,
asked about
slowly. Isha,
trends
just
in.
repeat the question a bit slowly, please.
Okay, okay, ma'am.
No, I don't
So
understand.
my question was, so if we talk about trends in advertising, like
Yes, trend.
advertising of beauty and brain health products are always made in a manner which constantly point out the flaws of people. So, sir, do you think that media has created an image of perfection in the minds of people, which is turning out to produce a negative impact?
Yeah.
She has
Well,
freeze.
one thing is that I don't, you know, I don't know how much advertising has changed over the years. I mean, like for example, we now have, because it's so expensive, we now have many short, very short commercials. You know, 10 seconds. You know, it's all you really need sometimes to convey something, because the conveying is not only done through language, but it's done through body language, through facial expression, through all the other, you know, like for a newspaper, a magazine ad, people look at it for a fraction of a second. So it has to make some kind of an impression on you. And basically, one thing that is happening is I think that advertisers are much more into studying uh, metacognitive ways people, that is how it affects them, uh, how it affects their brains. So there's a lot of interest in the way people's brains are affected. And I told you that sometimes they put people in these big machines and show them and say a word and see how their brains light up. Because what they're trying to figure out is they can figure out a way to get around your powers of discrimination and just affect you automatically. So that's an element of what's going on. They all have people who have psychoanalytic skills uh, to to determine how they can affect your psyche. You know, Freud talked about people having id, ego, and superegos. The id is desire. I want it now. I must have it. I want to buy it. So the ego, the superego says you don't need it. You can live without it. And the ego is saying, well, maybe think about it before you buy it, something like that. So what the advertising agencies are basically is attacking our ids, our desires. And desires are infinite. You know, I heard somebody saying, talking just in the radio the other day, and saying, "Is people who aspire to be like the wealthy, well, they get rich, and then all of a sudden they realize, well, there are people who are richer than they are, so they aspire to get richer than they are, than the other people. Then it's endless. There's no end to desire. Uh, so you have to what you have to learn is you can be sometimes you're not going to be able to reach that level, but you could be happy with what you have. So that's part of it. The id aspect of our psyches is what the advertising agencies do. They're basically, the ads are basically emotional. Sometimes like the computer, they used to have rational ads full of data, and it has this processor and this, that, and the other thing. But basically, I think the appeals are to emotions. Uh, this is going to make my life better. If I have this car, people will see that I'm a success and envy me and so forth. That kind of thing. I don't, as far as trends are concerned, I don't know whether, I'm really not, the best person to talk about that because I haven't been, following it very much. But essentially, as I see it advertised, in fact, I was just on a program about advertising with the Advertising Education Foundation a few months ago. But the point is that in the final analysis, advertisers are going to do whatever they can to attract our attention and to get us to act. It's one thing to attract your attention. That's not enough. You have to get people to actually make the commitment. You could say that some advertisements have a kind of postmodern quality to them. That is, they don't seem to have a rational dimension to them. I recall seeing some ad in which women are screaming out a window, and you're wondering, what's this all about? And I've seen some ads where you don't even know what's going on. So that's sort of the effect of postmodernism on people, that in the postmodern society, and I think we live in a postmodern society, although now I understand they have a new term for it. Isn't postmodern, it's something else. But in a postmodern society, where elite culture and pop culture are sort of merged, so you don't have to worry about, in postmodern culture, you don't have to worry about elite culture and pop culture because it's all the same thing as far as they're concerned. So that I think has had an effect on advertising, on a sense of the way the mind processes information and what the world is like in a postmodern society. That, I say, would be an interesting trend. Although postmodernism came in 1960, so I don't know what the new term is. I saw it somewhere. I can't remember it, but so I guess it's a postmodern theory, and I don't know what that means. But in the final analysis, Aristotle said that you can persuade people three ways. One is by the logic of your argument. One is by the status of the person making the argument, and one is by emotion. And I don't think things have changed too much since then. We're just trying to figure out who will be a good spokesman on the basis of status. What logical arguments you can use to convince people to use this product, or how to affect their emotions so they'll feel that they absolutely need this product. Of course, we have lots of people creating projects we didn't know we need. That's kind of an interesting aspect of modern life. There are people who are making products like these smart speakers. Who knew we needed these projects until they invented them? And then they turn out very useful. For example, I have Google. I have a Google speaker, and it plays music, it plays news. I can use it for research. Instead of looking up telephone numbers, I ask it to do little things. So I got the first one I got was a Amazon one, and my daughter came up to visit me. A daughter came up to visit me, and she liked it so much she went home and she bought one, and then she gave me one. So then I bought another one. So I actually have
Google Assistant.
It's great. I have let's see, I have three Googles and three of the other. I have like 6 of those things in the house. They're like $20 each. You can get them, and there's a logic to it because I live in a house that's on a hill, and so the back part of my house is three stories, and the front part is 2 stories.
Mhm.
My wife has her study in the basement, in the bottom, in the 3 stories below. So in the old days, I do all the cooking lately since the last. I retired when my wife was still working, so I started doing the cooking. So she cooked for 40. We've been married almost 60 years. So she cooked for 40 years. I'm doing. So if I wanted to call her up for dinner, I had to race down the stairs and give a yell. No, now what I did is I put in an Amazon, whatever, what's the Amazon? I can't think of her name.
Assistant?
I, yeah, I put in the Amazon down there, and so I can just make an announcement. Phyllis, dinner is ready. Please come up. So she comes. She comes up. So that saves me racing up and down the stairs. And then she always wanted to have a device that she could get different radio stations on. So I put one of those in the kitchen, but they're also useful for timers and so forth. So basically, for the price of an expensive or moderately expensive radio, I have these gizmos all through my house. Like I have two in this room from which I'm talking. I have two. I have Alexa and I have Google, and I use Google for when I want to research because it's got a better search engine, and I use Amazon because I like the music they have sometimes better. So it just shows you how these people are inventing products that you don't even know you need. And then you don't have to advertise them too much because people can see a sense right away how important they are. I think my daughter has quite a few of them too. She put one in her car. So when she's driving to work, as in the days when we used to drive to work, she hasn't driven to work since March, but she can record. She's a psychoanalyst, so she has all these, she's very much occupied by how her time is spent. So she can make messages, she can make to-do lists with Alexa. So that's, I don't know if I answered your question about trends. I would say, well, maybe postmodernism is a trend and a trend towards shorter commercials. In case you're interested, the Super Bowl will have commercials, $5.5 million for a commercial on the Super Bowl. So the question is that expensive or is it cheap? You know, well, if 2 billion people are watching it, it's cheap. The problem is people are very, very much interested in the quality of the commercials in the Super Bowl. And so the advertising agencies have to knock themselves out trying to figure out commercials that will stand out from the others and will be effective. And many times they're terrible. A lot of them are terrible. But some of them are actually quite brilliant. So there's nothing saying that, you know, a commercial can't be brilliant, like Ridley Scott's 1984 commercial that I advertise. It's considered probably the most important commercial ever made, or certainly one of the most commercial. So there is room within popular culture for distinguished works of art, I would say. Yeah. So much for that.
Thank you so much, sir. So now, Harsh, I'll request you so kindly to, to summarize the session because it's almost like 10 p.m. here in India. So it would be almost like 8:30 a.m. there in San Francisco as well. So
it
sir
is
has
8:30.
given,
Yes,
so it was a discussion of 1.5 hours. So even sir would be tired. So
yeah, thank you so much, sir, for interacting with us, taking out your valuable time. Like we really appreciate the effort that you put into make this meeting possible. Like we have a 13-hour time gap between India and San Francisco, and at the age of 87, like you have the zeal for work. Like that is really impressive. When I heard about that, like I was really inspired by the effort that you're making, that you made to like interact with us, and I really appreciate that effort. And it was a great session, sir. I believe we all now have a better understanding about Rashomon and media analysis. So thank you so much, sir.
Yes, it's my pleasure. I enjoyed it. I thought the questions were very good. It was a lot of fun for me. I mean, I always like to talk about my theories and my work and so forth. So it was a pleasure for me to have this session. I thank you for inviting me. Okay.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for such an
Thank you so
enlightening
much,
session.
sir.
Thank you,
Okay.
sir.
Thank you so much,
Goodbye.
sir.
Okay. Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye, sir. Take
Bye,
care.
sir.
I'm going
Thank
to
you,
have
sir. Take
breakfast
care,
now.
sir.
And to all attendees who there is an announcement that you are going to get the participation certificate soon. So all the participants are going to get the participation certificate for this session of sir very soon.
Thank you very much.
So yes,
Thank you, sir.
all attendees as well, and the panelists, and to sir as well. Thank you so much.
It was my pleasure, Barbara. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye, sir. Take care.
Bye,
Thank you,
sir.
sir.
Take care, sir.
Bye.